Above the Law, a trauma-informed, appreciative approach to examining mayoral control of New York City public schools. We will now continue with Cycle 1, Stage 1, disclosure of my traumatic narrative relating to the governance goal, equity. Webster's dictionary defines equity as a justice according to natural law or rights, specifically freedom from bias or favoritism, or something that is equitable. According to the NYSED report, proponents of mayoral control list rigorous learning standards, greater autonomy for schools to meet standards, and more accountability to measure the ability to meet standards as examples of equity under mayoral control. However, once a system exists where executives can determine when or if they follow policies due to a lack of oversight, you have a system that will never achieve equity because someone has to suffer due to organized malfeasance, and that someone usually includes selected persons outside of or who are not perceived as a threat to the power structure. Another of my most traumatic experiences of the mayoral control was encountering environments where you were forced to follow standardized curriculums with fidelity, the ultimate example of a misalignment between policy and practice. 21st century learning calls for meeting the needs of all stakeholders, which means learner-centered practices for students and adults. However, as expressed by most of the participants from the 5 public hearings, at times, mayoral control leaders implement strategic practices that encourage the status quo, which interferes with the achievement of all students. The cycle begins with central agencies expressing the need for budget cuts to staff and programs that impact the most vulnerable populations, while voting yes to corrupt contracts that benefit central agencies and vendors more than organizational stakeholders. As a teacher, contracts causing the most fury include those that support standardized, one-size-fits-all approaches to curriculum and instruction. Consequently, standardized curricula lead to professional development that fails to align with research or data and stifles teachers' sense of creativity and voice. The stifling of teacher voice and creativity trickles down to all stakeholders, leaving teachers and parents feeling demoralized and students without the staff-based, program-based, and research-based supports required for whole child development. Politicizing what's taught in our classrooms leads to a system where all school districts are not created equal. That means that while some districts have parents who pick up the slack caused by budget cuts, and others, kids are left hanging with nothing to keep them engaged in the schooling process. For those schools with parents who remain able to pick up the slack, they usually are able to avoid the disrespect of having to follow standardized curriculums with fidelity. Interestingly, despite research supporting the value of project-based learning for students, even principals who rally against mandated curricula are ignored. Why? Because the new administration's goal of proving its superiority to the previous administration leads to trickle-down pressures that focus on making things look good, and Central doesn't believe in or trust the content or pedagogical ability of specific school communities to ensure student achievement. This type of poor, top-heavy decision-making leads to an inequitable haves and have-nots system whose climate depends on compliance and says to follow the law or suffer abuse at the hands of the system for some. At the same time, the other is trusted to use their expertise and experience to ensure student achievement. Let's dive into one of the previous shown articles. For another yet more recent example, the April 10th, 2024 report by Alex Zimmerman of Chalkbeat summarized stakeholder feelings towards the city's new mandated reading program. Zimmerman highlights the notion of a tale of two cities by quoting Rafael Alvarez, the superintendent of Community School District 15, as saying, "We have a different community. It's the reason why there's flexibility around how we're using the curriculum, because we don't have the same demographics where all our students need it verbatim with fidelity every day." The data supports Alvarez's claims of a different population, and Alvarez expressed the inequitable truth. Low income, high diversity, and low performing districts remain stifled by curriculum mandates. Needed was the term utilized by Superintendent Alvarez, even though no written policy states that students with specific demographics need a year round test prep one size fits all approach to teaching and learning because research does not support this action. Nevertheless, thousands of students with the highest need are denied authentic learning opportunities yearly for no other reason besides someone in power saying they need it. As someone who spent 15 years under mayoral control, I can attest that in some schools and under particular leadership, you must fight for students to receive authentic learning opportunities. Advocating for vulnerable students is physically, emotionally, spiritually, and psychologically draining, and it places a target on your forehead. Like labor policies, rigorous learning standards, greater autonomy for schools to meet standards, and more accountability to measure the ability to meet standards or policies for the haves, not the have nots. One of the findings from Zhang's 2022 investigation of the relationship between perceived government corruption, social status, and depressive systems discussed the notion of persons with high social status perceiving less government corruption than those with lower social status, thus experiencing less depressive episodes than their counterparts. When considering social status, consider the difference in student demographics between Community School District 15 and Community School District 19. How do we ensure equity or that stakeholders within systems like Community School District 19 remain held to the same learning and policy based expectations as stakeholders within Community School District 15? Speaker number 2 from Staten Island said it best when they professed that equity is impossible to achieve if we silence the voice of our stakeholders. Up next, I will continue with the disclosure of my traumatic narrative as it relates to the governance goal engagement. See you there.